Oh, hello there. I'm Dave Butler.
I'm Grace Freeman.
Welcome to Don't Miss This.
Our scripture study class.
I was going to mouth it, but you messed that up.
I know, because you pointed over and then I got nervous. You knew. You knew already.
Hope you are having a fantastic summer. If you're new, we go through the scriptures chunk by chunk. And we talk about just some of our favorite parts, some of the things we think you don't want to miss. Hopefully it just is a conversation starter for either with yourself, I don't know, what thought sparker.
Yeah.
Don't have conversations with yourself, y'all. Or, with others. But we're in the Book of Mormon this year, and I just want to say, I was just talking about this somewhere yesterday or something recent, that I am genuinely falling in love again with this book, chapter by chapter, as we go through it. We're talking today about a little bit about opposition, which we'll get into. And I'm actually genuinely surprised at the opposition against the Book of Mormon. I can see why there might be opposition against the idea in and of itself, but I cannot find any, within the pages. I mean, except for here and there. You find things that we're probably misinterpreting or whatever, right?
Yeah.
But as a whole, the messages that are in here, the things that it is teaching, I cannot, and sometimes I play devil's advocate in my mind.
And try to figure it out.
Yeah, this is genuinely a beautiful book. Surely another collection of stories of Jesus and the God that it presents, the character and the heart of God that it adds to what we learn in the New Testament and in the Old Testament is, I think, remarkable. So I'm just loving it. So we're happy you're here with us for this. Alma 30 and 31 is our chapters for today. So just a short little guy. We called it a more powerful effect because of that opposition that we're going to talk about. We meet in two groups of people today that are stand up against belief and we find that throughout the book. And I just think once again it presents, like we all have, two different options. What is it that you are going to believe? And I just you get a little bit nervous about this gentleman that we meet today in chapter 30. He seems really good and really influential and really powerful and almost faith-shaking a bit.
Yeah.
And
even from a reader's perspective, which is crazy.
Yeah. We're not even living in, where's the dates? They disappeared. 75 BC. We're not even hearing it, and yet we are. We're going to get into that. But you might have this feeling as you read some of his writings and teachings, and as you approach some of them within conversations with friends on YouTube, TikTok, wherever you're finding it, and be a little bit shaken by it and think, whoa, that had an impact on me. And then to be reminded throughout this lesson too of the more powerful effect, more than what the enemy to goodness and righteousness can muster up. The power and goodness of God will just always be more than whatever the enemy can scrounge up. So that's why we called it that. So let's jump in. Alma chapter 30. And I just want to point out two things at the beginning. One, it's just so interesting, by the way, that they say in verse 4 and 5, in the 16th and 17th year, there were no disturbances and we had peace. And the fact that you have to mention 2 years where you had peace feels really, really exhausting. And sometimes life can legit be that exhausting.
That you feel like you have to say, oh no, I had a good day.
I had a good day today.
Yeah.
And you're just like, oh my goodness gracious, But I do love right in the midst of that verse 3, there is just this simple formula, the people that observe to keep the commandments of the Lord. And that's what brought about that peace for the year 16 and year 17. And I can almost hear an opposition to that of somebody, just saying, like, it can't be that simple. And my experience says otherwise. Have you ever read that book, All I Really Needed to Know I Learned in Kindergarten?
Yeah.
That essay. And when you read it and there's just the simplicity of that, it just makes you think of the commandments of the Lord for a second. And what if everybody lived them genuinely? Like, what if everyone sought with all their heart to love their neighbor as themselves? And what if no one lied? And what if no one stole? And what if no one coveted? And what if this good, kind God was who you looked for as your image of the kind of life that you wanted to live? What genuinely, what if everyone lived out their lives the same way Jesus of Nazareth lived out his? If he was your mentor and all of us took him as our mentor, really imagine what this world would be like.
And I can't help but notice that it says observe to keep the commandments. They're observing the commandments. It's really easy when you talk about the commandments to switch that word with something else. You say keeping the commandments, following the commandments.
Breaking the commandments.
Yeah, there's a lot of different options. I think it's so interesting that they use the word observe, because to me, when you say the word observe, that's not just living that, but everywhere you look, you're surrounded by it. And I think that we might I don't think I ever realized the importance of not just me following and keeping the commandments, but the power that comes when you look around and you're surrounded by other people who are also following the commandments.
Right.
It might help you live differently.
Yeah.
You might live better simply because you're observing other people doing it.
Yeah.
You'll say, you're living it in a way that I want to live as well.
Yeah. And I love that concept of like observing and just seeing what are the fruits of someone's life while they live in a certain way.
Yeah.
And observing and thinking like, oh, I saw this little video the other day I posted on my Instagram of this little boy. Like, did you see this in my stories where he like took all his bunnies and chickens?
Yes, goodbye. I sent it to my nephew, to Hank, because he has chickens and bunnies. I said, he's growing up to be him.
Yeah,
I can't wait.
and he put them all on this little train and just drove it, and I just watched it, and I was like, what a life, you know? I was like, that little guy is living life.
You're quitting everything
correctly.
To raise bunnies and chickens.
Yes, yeah. And there's like some aspect to that of observing the lives of people that you admire. And just seeing like, well, wait, why are you, how did you get that 16th and 17th year of peace and wholeness? Remember that word peace can be replaced with wholeness. And there's something about that. I want to live a life fulfilled and whole, and how'd you do it? And the formula is super simple. But it says then in the end of the 17th year, there was this man who comes, his name is Korihor, and he was Antichrist. You find out in verse 6. And it's interesting to say Antichrist because I want to make a list of everything Christ stands for. And I would just say, like, you're anti those things? Like, that's intriguing to me that you've chosen to be Antichrist. Like, do you know anything about his life? You know, or the way he talked to people, or the way he treated people? And it mentions this idea that there was no law against the way somebody believed. And I like that it sets that up. And he uses this phrase in verse 9. It was someone's, I don't know why I did that. Their privilege to believe. That's what I called the entire section. It was your privilege to believe and to serve God. And I love that phrase. I just was so captured by that idea of not you're supposed to believe and you're supposed to serve, but it's turning it on its head for me to say it's your privilege to believe and it's your privilege to serve. I'm remembering a story I heard one time of, I believe it was we quoted those lectures from Truman G. Madsen where he talks about all the presence of the church. And I believe it was in the Joseph Fielding Smith's lecture. Y'all, that is seriously coming out of a 12-year memory right now. So, but the story's good no matter what. But just of this, so erase that part. Who cares where it came from, right? I just want you to, of this young boy or girl who wanted to serve as a missionary and just kind of had to fix some of their habits in their life before they could serve, and meeting with their stake president or someone, and that person helping them fill out their missionary recommendations said, the Lord will let you serve a mission. And I remember hearing the story and that wording being so interesting because I'd always kind of felt like you're supposed to or whatever. But the way that sounded to my heart changed the way I thought. Where it's like the Lord's going to let you be involved in this privilege, the privilege of believing and the privilege of serving. And I just was really captured by that in verse 9. So, and what I wanted to say that in addition to that is we have the privilege to believe and we have the privilege to serve, but it's a choice that we're going to have to make. And one concept I'd like us all to think about as we read this As Korihor is about to present another argument and another way to live and another way to think and another way to believe, it's going to require as much faith to follow his philosophies as it is to follow a life of Jesus's philosophies and beliefs. If you want to just lay them out on equal terms, that if you want to believe there's a God, you have okay, or you can believe that there isn't a God, right? But you're going to have to take a leap into the dark on both of those. And I just think it's important to see in the Book of Mormon where it says he was Antichrist, that there is opposition to faith and belief back then and in the world we live in today. And when there is an opposition or there is an opposing viewpoint, that we are not surprised that one would exist. From the very beginning, there's been a war in heaven, right? And it's a fight for souls. And why would that not continue today? And sometimes when we encounter it, we're taken off guard. We're just like, oh my gosh, I didn't know that there was some other way of thinking or believing. Or I shouldn't say that. I shouldn't say way of thinking or believing. I should say that there's direct opposition to faith and belief in the world that we live in. There are people who are deliberately opposed to the ways of Jesus in this world. And I just think it's helpful to know that as you live out your life.
And I even think it's interesting in verse number 6 that it starts with just one man. And I think sometimes we think that this opposition is coming in this big storm, or it's we talk about it as a really general thing. But for these people, it was not a general thing. It was, I'm sure that one man started with the people he knew and loved. And then all of a sudden it's wait, this inner battle that you're having within yourself of what do I believe is coming from what you're looking at. It's the people around you. And I think that's one of the reasons that it becomes so difficult. Is that you're wait, I didn't expect it to come from it's somewhere so close.
Yeah.
I didn't expect it to come, what's happening right now. This is changing the way I ever even saw the world.
Yeah, yeah. And I just like that we're about to see Korihor introduces these new concepts and these new thoughts and these new ideas to believe. But then I also don't stop reading because this next section can kind of feel overwhelming. But then there is Alma who will come back and push back against it, which is going to be cool.
The next little few verses start going through, and it's going to explain a little bit deeper into what Korihor teaches. And he's going to start talking and explaining, and you almost can hear him. And not even just within the verses, but as I was reading this, and then even before when me and David were talking, both of us went through it, and we were kind of almost astonished, which is so funny, but of course we were. It's just I always am when I read, that it feels so relevant. It doesn't sound like Korihor speaking in however what year this was. It feels like something that you hear all day, every day right now.
Yeah.
And the more you read it, the more that you hear what he's teaching. I think it kind of stung my heart because all of a sudden I was wait, this is familiar to me. This isn't strange when I'm reading this. This actually is full of things that have made me second guess and to think. And it's things that I hear all of the time. It's everywhere.
Right.
Right. And so we're going to go through and we kind of made a list about all the different things, just a few of you'll probably find more when you read it, but just
Love
a
those
few
lists,
ones.
by the way.
David in his list kick lately. A few of the things that we just pulled out that we're wait, this actually feels super familiar to us.
And I've done this in class before. I don't know if you have, but just open up these verses and just say, okay, find the argument. Oh, and I think one of the questions in the journal is that, what are some of the same arguments that Korihor had that you still see circulating today?
For sure. And you'll be it's really honestly easy to find them.
Yeah.
So we're going to start in verse number 13. And from the very beginning, he says, you're being foolish. It is so dumb to believe in something bigger than what you have going. That's foolish and vain. It's vain hope. It's a waste of time.
Yeah.
It doesn't even make any sense.
Which I feel whenever I read him use that word foolish and later he'll use the word silly, that there's almost a patronizing tone of voice against believers. And they're just You know, like, oh, you really, you believe in these old school traditions, like in Zeus or whatever, you know, like fables and all of those things. And it just can often come across as like really undermining because it's given in such a patronizing tone.
Well, even like, I won't lie, being called a fool, like that hurts so bad.
Yeah.
I don't know why. Maybe it's because people don't really do it. But like, if someone called me a fool, like I would feel like I was 2 years old. Like I'd be like, you're kidding.
I just think about that thing on Hunchback of Notre Dame where the guy's like,
You're
trying
that
to pick
guy.
out the fool.
Yeah, exactly. And he's looking and he's like, oh, all the things that you hold most dear,
They're stupid.
that's making you look like an idiot.
Yeah, and no one wants to be duped. You
Yeah.
know? Nobody wants to find out that I've been duped before, like stolen out of money, and I like did some stupid things. Like I trusted people in a stupid way, you know?
Yes.
Twice with our lawn, like hiring somebody to do our, I'm not kidding. Like where I look back on it and I'm just like, oh my gosh, why were you so dumb? Like, why did you give money before they, you know, before they ever came? And like, I seriously Venmo'd some guy whose name was like Happy Fox Panda or something. And Christian makes fun of me because he's like, Dad, clearly that was a fake account. And I'm like, I know now. But just like, and you feel so dumb, right?
Yeah.
And nobody wants to like do that with their lives.
And
their
especially,
beliefs,
that's like
you
your
know?
lawn. And you're
And I
like
feel
embarrassed
dumb. I
about
still
your
feel
lawn.
dumb, yeah.
But if someone looks at you and they're like, oh, everything that the way you're living, what you believe, the things that you hold most dear, that's making you look like an idiot.
Yeah, right.
Like that stinks.
Yeah.
And you hear that.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like that's crazy. That's crazy to believe in something like that.
Right. But I just want to I want to flip it already before people start feeling panicky about like, because, you know, because I want to say you can say it back to somebody, and Alma's gonna, right? He's gonna say it back in just a minute, but I just want to like, you know, do a little spoiler alert here and say, but it's like, yeah, but you have to like believe that there's no God and there's nothing bigger than you. You know, and if there was one, that would be foolish, you know?
Yeah.
I remember watching this interview one time between these two people kind of like having an argument about faith. And just one of them saying, well, what if you die and you actually do meet God? What are you going to say? When he asks, like, why'd you spend your whole life and career like fighting against me? You know? And then that guy responding and saying, I would say to him, why'd you make yourself so invisible? But then the other guy being interviewed said back, he's like, well, that's so interesting because I think he's everywhere, you know? And so really, like when he's got the microphone, you kind of feel a little bit like, oh man, is he right? But just wait a minute, you guys, Alma gets the microphone back.
Yeah, and it's going to be fine. But it is, I think that's one of the reasons that it feels like already one verse in, that it almost like does make you like shrink back a little bit because it hits really close to home.
Yeah.
It's things that we're not unfamiliar with. In verse number 15, he's going to go and almost like that exact interview, he's going to say, well, how do you know for sure? That's a crazy thing. Like, you're never going to be able to prove it. You're never going to know. You cannot know that there will be a Christ. That's impossible. So why are you believing? Because you're never going to know for sure. Verse 16, I think that's such an interesting phrase. It is the effect of a frenzied mind.
Yeah.
Partially because I think it like applies to that same thing as a fool, but also because I do tend to have a scattered mind. And I do, like, sometimes feel self-conscious about that. Or I'm like, wait, I don't know if I'm, like, really figuring this out. Or, like, I have 8 million thoughts in my head and I'm still trying to figure them out. And if someone looked at me and was like, yeah, look at you. You can't even think about math right now. Like, how are you supposed to know that there's a God? Like, that does sting a little bit. Mm-hmm. That it's like, wait, like, yeah, I don't know. Like, you're right. Like, I do have a lot going on in my head right now, so I'm not sure.
Yeah, or you just created this experience in your own head, right?
Yeah.
You're just like... Your spiritual memories, you just like recreated them in you, and it was just like a chemical reaction in you, and you're attributing it to like that's some of the things that you hear, and you're just like, oh wow.
Yeah, you're like, wait, that feels like it gets so messy. Verse 17 is all about like it's just every man for himself. Like just you have to figure this out. You're living your own way. Verse 18, I think is really interesting. You hear this a lot, even in that conversation David mentioned, that a man was dead, that was the end. Death is the end of the story. We don't know what's going to happen. Where's your proof that there's life after death? Why are you living your life for the future? Like, this is just the end.
Yeah. And I know we're on Korihor right now, but there is something interesting in 18 that, again, I already want to start poking holes in his arguments. Like, I just can't help it. Where he just says this: he did preach unto them, leading away the hearts of many, causing them to lift up their heads in their wickedness. And I would, like, when somebody has like a different way of like a philosophy that's, or an opposition to faith, I was like, what's your end goal? And where is this leading people to? Because most things I hear in church, we do have an open mic day, once a month or whatever, but are leading me to, I mean, that formula that Moroni gives us later, does it lead people to love? Does it lead people to like take care of other people? And in this scenario, those who are following Korihor's way of life and living, it is leading them to like a life of wickedness. And you're just like, really? Like that's like when you start looking at what are the fruits of this path, like where does this path actually lead? I just feel like that's a great way of analyzing, like, okay, what is it I want to believe? How is it that I want to live? And the question to ask is, where is it going to lead me to?
And anytime I hear lifted up, it makes me think of confidence. And usually when you're lifted up, you like, even like physically, like you can like see someone that's confident has like shoulders high and like their head held high.
Yeah.
And when I hear that phrase, that's what I think of. And it's so interesting that he says they were lifted up in wickedness, because if that's where you're putting your confidence, that is a really shaky place to build.
Yeah. And I'm also just thinking for the first time, that phrase lifted up, that if I ever feel like I'm better than other people because of what I think or believe, I don't think that comes from God, right? I just think, and that's a temptation for those who are believers, to look at unbelievers and think they are better. And I don't think that comes from God either, to feel that way. But if your belief system or thought system leads you to think that you are better than other people, that everyone else is dumb, I think you've got the wrong spirit inside you.
For sure. One of the other ones that I think is one of the most fascinating, and it's the one that made me restart reading and like look back at this entire chapter in a way that felt a little bit more relevant to me, is in verse 24. And it says, you say that this people is a free people. So it's Korihor talking, and he's talking about the people that are spiritual, religious, believing in Jesus. And he says, you say that they're free, but I say they are in bondage. And I think, like, it paused me in my tracks, and I thought about conversation after conversation that I've had, even in the last, like, year, but in the last 4 years, about commandments and following different rules or doing all of these things that people look at and they're like, you're trapped in religion. You're forced into obedience. You're living an obedient life isn't living free. You're trapping yourself with these rules and regulations.
Yeah.
And it's so interesting because usually when you think about looking at, we do all the time talk about like freedom and don't be held captive. Even that's like a theme in this book that you read about.
Yeah.
It's like
that God
Jesus
will set you free.
Yeah. Over and over and over. That's the theme of this book. And it's so interesting that he 100% flipped that. And you can see that, how easy it would be to say, you're not free.
Right.
You're trapped.
Right. That Jesus wouldn't draw any lines, because that they would confine you and they keep you in a place. And I can't remember if you and I were having this conversation or I said it on here. I just am confused about my life, everybody. I have a frenzied mind. But just, I was talking with a good friend about the law of consecration, and that could easily sound like a very restrictive commandment, right? As you understand it. But then he said this. He's like, I was sitting there and I was in the temple listening about thinking about this law of consecration and thinking about how materialistic our world is and how easy it is to become obsessed with clothes and the body and the way that we look and our money, and how easily, like, it's so easy to become obsessed with those things. And he just said, and then for the first time in my life, I saw a kind, wise father who 150 years before this obsession with materialism took over our country gave us the law of consecration to say, let me protect your heart against something that will canker and rot it really, really quickly. And to say, like, oh my gosh, Like, and I know we get those examples all the time of the way that the commandments set you free, but like, I have sensed, I can feel how easily it is to be obsessed with materialism. Like, it's like, I can sense it in me. And for a kind father to say, can I protect your heart against something that could so very quickly ruin you, David? And then you can see it. And I was like, oh, now I see where freedom actually is.
And I think...
Within the lines.
Yes, right? Yes. And that's a conversation that I don't even know how many times that I've had. Countless over the past year. And as I was reading that, this is going to sound like, this is going to be a funny, this is going to be a funny transition. It's fine, everyone. Because I was in Disney World last week. And as I was in Disney World, it was so funny because walking down like the streets of Disney World, you just see two exact opposites of people. And it is people that are having truly the worst day of their entire life, that they've never had a worse day ever in the history of their life. And then the next kid is like crying because they're so happy. They've never experienced joy happier than anything in the whole entire world. And me and my brother and sister-in-law were talking, and I was like, it's so funny that that's true about this place. That like, when I see it, it's just pure happiness, but it's really easy to see why it would look like the worst place on earth because of the lines, and it's so hot outside, and everyone's just waiting and waiting and waiting and waiting. And when I read this, I was thinking about Disney World, and I was like, it's so funny that the only difference between those two people at Disney World is just a perspective. That they're having the exact same experience. It's the same temperature for them. They're waiting in the same lines. They're going on the same exact rides. And all that's different between one and the other is one is finding 100% joy, and the other person is looking everywhere at the problems.
Yeah, there's that. Do you remember that? I think it's like, I think it's shorter than, longer than what I'm... Okay, it is as short as I thought it was. This little rhyme that Dale Carnegie said one time where he says, 2 men looked out from prison bars. One saw the mud, the other saw stars. And that's just like that whole concept that you're talking about, right? Yeah. Where it is so, and you said something earlier about like the person you're looking to, like, we can so easily live in an echo chamber in Instagram or YouTube or the people that we surround ourselves with, and how easily it is to just have some of those thoughts and ideas reinforced again and again for good or for bad.
Yeah. Well, and it's so interesting because Korihor actually gets like, the people take him. They don't know what to do. They can tell that it's a little bit messy. And so they're like, we should figure this out. And so they go take him, and they take him to first Ammon. And Ammon gets him and he's like, just get him out of here. Well, we just have to get rid of him and it's going to be fine. And so they get rid of him. He goes to the land of Gideon, and then those people, same issue. So they're like, we got to take him to the high priest. Like, someone needs to deal with this. That's not us because we're a little bit stressed about it. So someone else can figure out this situation. And it's so interesting because the high priest asks him a few questions that all start with why, which I think is a lesson in and of itself. That the first thing that he did not try to like condemn him. He didn't like sit him down and like just like attack him. The first thing he did was sit down and say, okay, why are you doing what you're doing? Mm-hmm. Let me figure out the why behind your actions. But one of the questions he asks is one that I think would be important to ask even myself every single day. Why do you teach this people that there shall be no Christ to interrupt their rejoicings? What is interrupting my rejoicing? Because these people are happy. They're experiencing what it feels like to rejoice in something bigger than themselves. Rejoicing isn't sad. It's not devastating. It's not something that holds you like captive in a terrible way. Yeah. Rejoicing makes you lift up your hands and cheer and sing. And it gives you freedom. And it makes you want to tell everyone you know. And it like gets you excited and it fills you with awe and wonder. And he says, listen, you're stopping people from experiencing this. People are rejoicing and they're experiencing happiness, but what's happening is you are trying to interrupt that good thing. And it just makes me think that maybe when we look at this list and we start panicking and we're like, I'm not really sure. And I'm not saying to just forget about all your like questions and what you wonder about and just like abandon them, because I do think there's value in sitting down and like working through things and wrestling with different things that you're thinking about.
Which is what the high priest does here. He's like, let's ask why, right?
Yeah, let's get to the bottom of this. Let's figure this out. But I do think that there is just in that little interrupting their rejoicings, I almost feel like there is just this call to action that says, listen, if you're battling this right now, find something to rejoice in. Don't you forget about celebrating what you believe.
Yeah.
And you know what makes your heart rejoice. You have memories of it, experiences that you've had when you have experienced what it feels like to rejoice in Jesus. Don't let that be interrupted.
Yeah.
You can doubt and wonder, and you can have these things that you're trying to resolve in your head, and you can question things, and you can still rejoice.
Yeah.
You can focus on rejoicing. It's like Disney World in my head.
Yeah.
Then I'm like, yeah, there could still be lines, and it could be 900 million degrees, and I've never sweat more in the entirety of my whole entire life. That is just true. But when I am on Thunder Mountain, I'm going to have the time of my life.
Yeah.
And that's what I want to remember. And I just think that, like, there's this moment in me that says, I just want to make sure that every day, even when things like get me and make me wonder and question, I hope every day at the end of the day, there's more rejoicing that I remember than like that stuff that's taking it away.
Yeah, and I think Jesus' intention is that there ought to be. And this man, Korihor, when he is asked the question, why? And his answer back is like, because you're holding people bondage. And then he says in verse 28, he was just like, you've brought them to believe in their traditions and their dreams and their whims and their visions and their pretended mysteries and their words. And I just think that's interesting that he's just saying like, you're just making people believe in other people's experiences, but that's not what God teaches. He says, have your own experience. And I think we're going to see that with Alma in just a minute. But I thought that was interesting in 28, how many times you talked about like their whims, their dreams. And it's just like, no, my response back to that must be that they're mine. They're my experiences. They're my beliefs. They're my dreams. They're my things that I've had. And we'll get into that in just a second. Alma's going to have that. But I think we get this little lesson here in verse 29. When they saw that he would revile against God, that he would stand in such opposition to him, it says in middle of verse 29, they would not make any reply to his words because that he should be bound and sent away. And sometimes the right approach to a Korihor is no reply and just turn it off and walk away. And just create a boundary there and just like, oh man, listening to you has a terrible effect on me. I got advice one time, and it was when you put on white gloves and you play in the mud never gets glovey. The gloves always get muddy. And sometimes the right approach is I have to just walk away from this. But sometimes, and perhaps more often, I don't know, somebody should stand up against what he's saying. And that's what Alma does. And I think that we ought to have in our minds and in our hearts be ready always for a reason that the hope is in you. Peter says that in the New Testament. People, you ought to have an argument against the Korihors of the world.
Well, and I love that you said the hope is in you. That is such a powerful line to me, because I think sometimes when we hear that and like we think about argument, it seems like it needs to be a fight. And I love that in all reality, the response should be hope-giving.
Yeah.
The response that you're having should be
Good
this
advice.
moment that's like, oh, they should, like, this doesn't need to be a detrimental conversation.
Right.
And I think that's important to remember.
Yeah,
you know?
I love that. And now Alma is just going to start speaking against the arguments of Korihor. And he starts off because remember the why was like, why are you interrupting people's rejoicings? And Korihor says, because you're binding them down and you're trying to take away their freedom, and it's all for your own gain. Funny flip of script. That's what we find out about Korihor at the end of the chapter. It was like, no, that's what you were after. We don't find that out to the end. But Alma addresses that first, and he says, that's not true. And I think sometimes that's the right argument, to simply say, what you have said is a lie. Right? Some of these other things we can talk about, but some of your arguments are simply not true. They are not factual. And one of the claims he was making is, Alma, you're trying to take advantage of people financially through all of the things that you're teaching. And he just says, that's not true. Check the receipts. That's just a lie. You know, you're making an accusation about me that is simply not true. And you're leading people away with a false idea. And he clears that up first. Then the second thing he does in verse 35 is kind of similar to verse 22, where he just says, now you believe that we deceive this people that causes such great joy in their hearts. The second thing he's going to start touching on is like, this works for them. It's working, right? Like, and chapter 32, which is the next time's lesson, is going to go more into this. He's like, but when you plant when you plant a seed and a flower starts to grow, it's working. So you can't stand there and say it's not working, because it is. They are experiencing actual joy. They're experiencing actual hope. They're living in rejoicing. And so it's working, right? And then third, he asks this question where he starts to flip it on him in 40, where he says, you say that there is no God. And then in verse 40, he says, I want to ask you a question, which is, what evidence do you have that there is no God, right? Or that Christ isn't coming? You're telling me that I'm lying by teaching people that, but I'm flipping it on you. You want me to prove it? I would like you to prove, please, that there is no God and that Christ is not coming. Why does the burden of proof rest with me? And he just flips that onto him. And he just says, I know there is a God. And then now he's going to go into his reasons for knowing.
And I think it's really interesting because even just hearing you say that, it almost I can't help but play like devil's advocate in my mind. I think you do that sometimes too, but like in my head, I'm like, well, where's the evidence? And like that is a natural question to ask. Like, okay, well, like where's the evidence against him, or where's the evidence for him? And Korihor asks the same exact question in verse 43. He's going to say, listen, okay, then show me a sign. If you say, like, if you are so confident that there is a God, then show me. Give me the evidence that you have. Show me why you believe what you believe. And Alma replies so quickly, and he said, wait a minute. You have had plenty of signs. You have seen it. There's been enough evidence in your life. And then he's going to go through, and he's going to say all of these signs. And it's so interesting because I forgot that this conversation started a little bit earlier, everyone, so my bad. But he says so confidently in verse 39, Alma does, that, listen, I know there is a God. There was not even a doubt. When he had to unpack this with Korihor, from the very first second in the conversation, he said, no. It's not that it is I know. I know there's a God. No matter what you say, I am sturdy in my ground in saying there is a God. And then when he answers that question, show me a sign, all of a sudden this conversation becomes a little bit more personal, I think. And even maybe a little bit more personal than it reads. Because it almost feels like Alma's going to look at Korihor and say, let me show you why I know. You've had signs because I've had signs. Let me tell you what the signs I've seen are, and you have just as much access to them as I do.
Yeah, and I actually like that he's doing two things here. One of them is he's answering that there from 28. And he says, no, let me tell you my
Yes.
reasonings. And he's also giving us a definition for a phrase we hear a lot in church, which is I know. We use that phrase a lot. And I can hear why somebody would hear a 10-year-old stand up at our pulpit and say, I know, and say, well, they must be brainwashed or something like that. I'd say, oh, let me give you a definition for what I mean when I say I know. What I'm trying to say to you is I have a belief, and now I have evidence for that particular belief.
Well, and I was at a conference and I heard the speaker one time, and someone wrote them a note and it says, is God real? Practical answers only. And it was that's such an interesting way of asking that question, because usually you would answer back and you'd be like, yes, because I had this experience. And that's really easy to be like, that's not that's not mine. I didn't have that experience. You could have just made that up in your head. And it was a question that the person that got this letter really had to work through. Mm-hmm. This moment that they were well, I don't know what to do. And they kind of talked to a spiritual mentor. And it's really interesting because their list ended up being very similar to this. Practical answers only. Is God real? Let me show you some practical answers. And in verse number 44, he's going to say, okay, look, when there are so many brethren that have borne testimony of it. It is not just me. Look around at the people you know, at the people that you've heard talk about it. That's not just me. There is multiple people that are all on the same page. Not only that.
Well, and I want to just say that's something that I think is really valuable, and it's a beautiful reason that we gather together in faith communities. Because I now have thousands. I have thousands of stories that I have heard of people's experiences and miracles with God. Like, honestly, if I were to count them up in my years so far in life, that is how many I've heard. And that's how many stories that I have cataloged that aren't just mine, but other people around me.
And you don't need
Of
to
every
discount
kind.
that. I think that's something that's really easy for us to do in our head. Well, it's not my story. It's not me. I didn't experience that. And I think that we might be surprised how giving faith is. That when you hear stories like that, you might be surprised how much your faith grew. Even though it wasn't necessarily your story, even though you didn't experience it.
Oh, yeah.
How much we can grow simply by the people we're surrounded with.
Sometime I got to introduce y'all to my friend who translated the Book of Mormon into Xhosa, Judy, the Xhosa, the clicking language in Africa.
Look at you like I was just going to pretend like I knew that.
Her retelling her translation of the Book of Mormon from English into Xhosa is one of the most faith-promoting stories I've ever heard in my life. It's a cornerstone in my belief in the Book of Mormon. Like, if I were to stand at a pulpit and say, I know this book is true, part of my list of how I know is her story. And like, there's so much value to the stories of and experiences of other people.
Well, and I think it's really easy to be like, oh no, I have to experience it for myself. And I'm like, wait, you hearing that story was an experience for yourself. What you felt when you heard that story is an experience. You don't need to look over that. You can live with that.
Yeah.
He's going to go through, he mentions prophets. Look at the prophets. Look at what they say. Look at what they teach. Look at what they've experienced.
Right.
You can bank on that.
Right.
That is something that is not just like the past 5 years. That is, I almost just said generational, which I guess is also true. That's generational truth.
Yeah.
That is like from way before you could ever even imagine.
Well, and really, honestly, if you want to talk about like the reality, Christianity is based on Jesus rising from the grave, right? That's the central truth of Christianity. And how do we know that? And it's like, oh, Mary was there, and John was there, and Peter was there, and Thomas wasn't, and then he was. And it's like, we believe their stories. And I just think it's really interesting that scripturally, like these major events happen with multiple witnesses to them.
Yeah.
Multiple stories. The most major events always come with multiple witnesses. And if you were to ask me, why do you believe in the resurrection? One of my answers is, I believe Mary and Peter and John and Thomas. Like look how they lived after.
Which is so interesting even when you think about the restoration of the gospel.
Yeah.
Another one of those moments that's like, oh, that wasn't just one kid.
Right. I believe Martin and David and Oliver. Like, you have to have 4 liars there, and I believe their story.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
I just, and then the 8 witnesses, I believe them.
And truly, with Jesus, with all of these stories, even every story in the Bible and the scriptures, like, it's so easy to be like, it's a lot harder to lie when you have to get 4 people on the same page.
Yeah.
Ask anyone that has 4 siblings how that goes when mom and dad are gone and you're trying to get on the same page about breaking the lamp, okay? It is like, that's a mess. Like, you don't want, like, it's not a personal story if my mom and dad are listening. And then there's like, that seems messy. But like, look at that as evidence. And then he's going to go through and he's going to say the scriptures. Read this. Every single page will be evidence of a God who lives.
Yeah.
Every single word denotes a God. Then he's going to say, and don't even get me started with the entire earth. Like, everything you see, everything you look at, that is evidence of a God. And it's so interesting. I read this yesterday, and then today I've been like playing this game in my head that every time like I'm just like looking around, I'll just play like, okay, well, why is that evidence of God? And it's been so funny, like even since waking up, like when I was getting ready, I was like brushing my teeth and I was like, oh, the fact that someone, like, I can breathe air. Like, you're kidding me. Yeah. That is a mess. I can't even get into it because I'm not smart enough to like even say why I'm capable. If I don't even know how I breathe, how do I breathe?
Right.
That's crazy.
Right.
Now I'm like, anyone can look at that, and there are 2 very simple sides of a coin there. Oh, science. And it's so easy to look and say, oh yeah, but who's that from?
Yeah. Yeah.
Everything you look at, you can just see him, his fingerprints, his like, almost just like, That's crazy to me.
And the fact that you have a brain that can even analyze those things.
Yeah.
You know, like that you can get outside of your head and observe your own thoughts. The fact that you can be an observer of your own thoughts.
Don't give me, you should have seen the way I was playing today, because I like got to work and like I like walked in and there was like, there was like 5 people in a room together, and I was like, the fact that all of us look different. The fact that like there is not someone on this earth that looks exactly like me.
Yeah.
That doesn't make any sense.
Right.
That's crazy. The fact that like we can just like go outside and like you can look at a tree and it can like, a tree can last through years and years and years as long as I've lived.
And it came from a seed.
That's crazy.
I think I told this story like 4 years ago on this podcast when we did Book of Mormon, because like legitimately, I was having one of these days where I was in my head about it, and I was at my friend's orchard. He has an orchard, okay? Oranges. It was in California. And like I like was out there in the morning and I picked up an orange for breakfast. You know, like I just got to pick it. And I was like, oh my gosh. You know,
you
like
wanted
this
to
is
move.
well, no, yeah. Well, no, number one, I wanted to move. But number two, I was like, these do not come from Costco. They legit come from a tree. They came from a tree. They came from a seed. Like somebody put a little seed into the dirt, and you don't even know where the dirt came from.
Don't get me started on dirt.
Right? Like it just, how come there's just dirt that's here?
Yes,
number one.
yes.
And like, and people are like, oh, it's a breakdown of all the organisms, or like, it's, oh my gosh.
Yeah, who planned that?
Yeah.
Who planned that was gonna work?
Like how come you can have a seed? Like you can just like, it looks like a rock. I'm like looking for a seed.
Looking around for like we have seeds on the table.
And you just put it in the ground, and then like water that drops magically from the sky, and people are like, it's the water cycle. And I'm like, don't say water cycle to me. Don't say condensation. Okay? That's magic, okay? Because water, hydrogen and oxygen married each other somehow, 2 hydrogens and 1 oxygen, and it just drops from the clouds. You don't know what clouds just appear in this atmosphere, right? And then all of a sudden, it just goes into the dirt that we don't know where it came from, into the seed, and somehow the seed knows how to drink it, and then the sun feeds it like this ball of burning gas.
And who planned the sun?
Exactly.
I'm like...
And who can eat sun? How come a plant knows how to make leaves that can eat the sun? I can't eat the sun, but a tree can eat the sun. And people are like, it's chlorophyll. And I'm like, don't chlorophyll me. That's a word a scientist made up for magic. Right? Because they're just like, crap, we can't write magic in the science book. So we better come up with a word. Let's call it a mitochondria, okay? Because like we don't even know what to call it. And then it just grows up. The plant just grows and it barks itself one day. It's just like, oh, I bet.
And it's like, oh, it's like getting windy, so it just knows how to get stronger.
Yeah,
I'm
right?
like,
It's just like, oh, makes more. And then it just makes flowers. Like flowers just appear out of its arms, you know, where it's just like, oh, today will be a flower making day.
And it knows when it's sunny. Like it knows when it's like needs to like start blooming.
Yeah, it's like, oh, I'm supposed to shed my leaves.
Yeah, it's like, oh, time
winter's
to grow.
coming. It doesn't even
Time
look
to
at a
grow.
calendar, and then all of a sudden those flowers like just turn into fruit. They know how. They're like, that's magic. Flowers just like, I've decided to become an edible piece of fruit, right? And so it just turns into a piece of fruit, an orange, and here I come one day. And there it is in the morning in California.
First of all, and don't even get me started about the fact that a human could eat something that grew off that tree.
That's what I'm trying to say, right? Where it's just like, and when they're done cooking, they know, and they just drop. And oranges in particular, they have an airbag. You know, they have that like squishy thing because it knows it's going to hit the ground. And then like you just like, and all those holes where moisture can come in and not out, and it can just like hold it in there. And then I pick it up, and I'm just like, oh my goodness, God packed me breakfast. It's like wrapped up. It's like legit wrapped.
It has a Tupperware.
Right, it's Tupperware. And I open it, and he already cut it up for me, too.
Pre-sliced? No, you're pre-sliced breakfast. Bye.
And you're just like, how in the world? Like, I just want to like, well, I always want to live in that kind of wonder, right? I want to live in the wonder of the world around me. And I'm not kidding you. On that day and other days since then, I've been like driving to Teach Institute sometimes. And I'm just like, is there really a God? You know, you just get inside your head and you're like,
you on the way to
whoa, yeah. Right? And you're just like, whoa. I mean, like, wow, this is a big belief or whatever. And then I remember like at a red light and looked over in the median and there was like a tree. And I remembered that orange experience and I was like, yeah, there is. You know, and I just kept driving. It's like there's some, you know.
Yes.
These like when we say I know and I believe, they're not just whimsical. They're based on experience, on authority, on a multiplication of other witnesses of people I trust and know and look up to and just barely met or whatever.
Well, and I think that would be a really cool discussion, even just to write at the top of that paper, that same letter, like, is God real? Practical answers only.
Yeah.
And just write down, what are your practical answers?
Yeah.
It can look like an orange. That's the truth. Great. Put it. It can look like scripture. It can look like maybe you need to take some of his. And maybe if you're like in a moment that you wonder, maybe you want to go to these places. And you want to do a study that is just like, okay, like, let me get back into this. Let me figure this out. Let me sit with this for a while. And maybe your practical answers only looks like a story that you heard one time about someone translating the Book of Mormon. And that is your, like, moment. And whatever that will be, because what's going to happen is they have this whole conversation and it ends. And it's kind of a messy ending. That's the truth for Korihor. He gets struck dumb. It's a whole thing. There's lots of things that are going on, okay, everyone? We're just doing fast forward mode about it, okay? And by verse 52, Korihor can no longer talk. He asks for a sign. It's messy. He gets turned dumb because it's kind of like a messy conversation. He can't talk anymore, and it's kind of Alma like said, "Listen, I'll prove it to you. Here we go. Like, this is it. Like, we have to be done with this conversation." And then he makes him dumb, which is crazy. And he goes, and the conversation's over. Korihor's dumb, and he sits down and he grabs a note and he just writes, "I know that I cannot speak. And I know nothing save it were the power of God could bring this upon me. Yea, and this part is, like, I think one of the most powerful moments of testimony in this story. And I always knew that there was a God. That even Korihor could have sat down and made a list. Mm-hmm. And maybe he forgot, or maybe he pushed it all away, or maybe he got so caught up in all of the other things that just seemed to dwindle and fall, or whatever it is. But I can't help but think that maybe the difference is just remembering. Mm-hmm. You always knew. So what are your answers to that? How? How do you know?
Yeah.
And maybe don't forget about those answers. So when you're driving, you can see a tree and think about an orange and remember.
Right. And I think it's just really wise to stop and think to yourself, whatever beliefs I currently have, to ask myself, why do I have them? What's my evidence for them? What road are they leading me down? What's it causing me to think about others? What's happening in my heart because of this? And if he'd done that, maybe he would have realized, like, oh, I was doing this because I liked all the attention, and if we could be honest with ourselves about it, and that conversation also leads to a strengthening of faith. Because I just think if we were to say any phrase, any I know phrase, we could and ought to have our reasons for why.
For sure.
And they can start with other people.
Yep.
And Alma will get more into that next time in Alma chapter 32 and next time's lesson. And I just want to give one little bit of hope here, because there is a sad ending at the very end. He dies. And in verse 60, we see, thus we see the end of him who perverteth the ways of the Lord. And we see that the devil will not support his children at the last day, but doth speedily drag them down to hell. That it's just like, oh man, we just eventually will see the end results and fruits of, of where these paths lead. And it does have that sad ending. But there is this happy verse in the middle of that sadness in 58 where it says, it came to pass, they were all convinced of the wickedness of Korihor. Therefore, they were all converted again unto the Lord. And I just was captured by and underlined that phrase in verse 58, converted again. That if I find myself caught up in some of these Korihor type beliefs and thoughts and oppositions, that God is working to convert me again. He's not done with Korihor. He's not done with me. And I just love believing in a God and in a gospel that allows for a verse 58, that allows for someone like me to be converted again.
Chapter 31 is going to lead into sort of a different story. And what happens is there are these people, they leave from the Nephites, they're called the Zoramites, they go live this different life. And Alma has this moment when he starts to feel really sad that they are separated, that they're living differently, that they're doing things differently, that they don't want to be associated with the Nephites, or even, I think you could say, with the believers of Christ. They
and
wanted
maybe
space.
because of what he just saw with Korihor, where you just saw like, man, I saw just the sadness that brought in his life, you know? And then now he's going to be left with just that. Everybody he sees kind of following that same trajectory.
For
that
sure.
Same sadness.
For sure. And that's going to be in verse 2 when it says that he was just like really torn up about it. He was exceedingly sorrowful. And he begins to have this idea. And
can I just say this? I'm so sorry to interrupt because I'm just thinking about that thought I had in the last chapter about that if the way you believe and think leads you to think that you're better and smarter than people and that you start to look down on them, the opposite of that would be the response of Alma in 31. Ooh. It would be one of like, oh, I'm genuinely sad and heartbroken about that. I just think there's like that, the difference between there is kind of interesting.
That's super interesting. Yeah. Way cool. And he's going to go through, and Alma responds in such a powerful way because he's going to notice people that are living differently than him, that might be making choices he would never have made, that might be making choices that he says, wait, that's not going to lead you to a happy and good life. And usually when that happens, when you feel like maybe, I don't know if I want to say like the word correct, but like when you want to like help someone find a better life or correct some behavior or actions, there's two very, I think, quick responses that you can take. And Alma addresses them in verse number 5 really quickly. He says, and now, as the preaching of the word had a great tendency to lead the people to do that which was just, the word of God tends to help people change their actions. And he's going to compare that to the sword right here. He says, yea, it had more powerful effect on the minds of the people than the sword. And it's so interesting because when you're trying to help someone change behavior, I really do think that there are multiple ways of doing it. And one of the quickest ways is a consequence, a really bad consequence.
Yeah,
looking at someone, and the sword is going to be a brutal consequence. You can push someone in fear to change behavior. You can push someone in consequence to change behavior. You can use a weapon to change someone's behavior. But Alma knows that there's something even more powerful than that. There's something more powerful than fear to change someone's behavior because it doesn't just change your behavior, it changes your thoughts and your heart.
Yeah.
And he says, I need to go in this situation and I am not worried about the behavior. I am worried about the hearts of this people.
Yeah.
And if I change their hearts, their behavior will consequentially change.
Right.
And that is why you need the word of God. Because you can go in with a sword and you can change behavior, but you're going to need the words of God to change someone's heart. And that's how he goes in. And he says, okay, I need to go into this situation and I need to introduce them to the God that I know. And he realizes that sometimes in those situations, it's a little scary. You're a little bit afraid of maybe disappointment. Oh, wait, I forgot about this. And it's good.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, everyone. The word of the week this week is word. And I think that the definition from the 1828 dictionary is so happy because it says living speech, promise, signal, tidings, declaration, affirmation, expression. But I just love that there is just this underlying moment of the word being good news. And I like that it says living speech because the word of God tends to bring life into hearts.
Well, and I also think this is really interesting that you know how often you can have something somebody said to you just circulate around your mind and heart for years and years and years, right?
Yes.
And it just like you've based some of your decisions based off of what someone had said to you or just some of the promises that people have made and just how powerful words can be. But consider if they came from God himself and the impact that they could have on what somebody believes about themselves, and it just can live in them and just grow in them and impact just so much of somebody.
Which I think is one of the coolest parts, that it doesn't feel like words should be stronger than swords. But I think every time it is. That I've gotten like hurt when I was in 5th grade, and like you just heal. Like you sprain your ankle and in 6 weeks you're gonna be okay. Like you just get up and you can go and you can play soccer again. But like there are still things that like even like I'm in therapy right now, and there's things that like were said to me when I was in 5th grade that I like still am working through.
Hold on to. Yeah.
Yeah, that it's like still causing issues in my life. And I love that from the beginning, Alma says, listen, I'm not going to go in with a sword because that could give, that like is going to maybe change their behavior for a minute, but it's a lot easier to go back and forth living your life. But there's something about the words of God that will change the way you live.
And I just, we picked one word per week on here, but I think it's like powerful that it's not just words, but it's the word of God. Because I don't know what your therapist is, talking to you about, but I just think like there is something about identifying, like, why did you give so much value to that particular person's words? They don't even know you. Like you can like scroll through Instagram and someone on there's like, you're doing a great job or whatever. And you're like, yeah, that doesn't really impact me because you don't really know me. And who are you? You're not really an expert or whatever,
Yeah.
But there's something about like, because words are powerful, but words become more powerful depending on who they come from.
For sure.
And he's just saying, these are the words of God that I am taking to people.
100%. And I think there's something to be said here that Alma was willing to go to help people that maybe few people wanted to go to. Maybe few people said, that's not for me. I don't want to go into that mess. And he teaches a really powerful lesson because before he goes and surrounds himself with these people, he chooses to not go alone. And I think that is so beautiful that, first of all, Alma was not afraid to go and be with people that were different than him, but also that he walked into that situation not alone. He walked in and he said, I am going to surround myself with people so that when this gets hard or overwhelming or it doesn't go the way I thought, or maybe I start questioning who I am or what I believe or why I came in the first place, that I will be able to have people next to me that remind me what to do.
Yeah.
Who I am.
Yeah.
And he goes through it in verse number 7. He says, he starts naming names, and he says, the names of those whom he took with him were, and then he lists all of these names. And I just have wanted to take that to heart so much in my life, that I want to be willing to go wherever God wants me to go, but I know that sometimes I forget who I am, or I start to be disappointed, or I want to turn back, and God did not ask me to go by myself. I think that there is an invitation, and he says, surround yourself with people that will go with you, people that know who you are, people that will back you up and cheer you on and be able to go into this situation to make it better. You don't have to go by yourself here.
Yeah.
And so that's going to be the little journal sheet, the worksheet. They listed the names, which I think is powerful. Don't just say, oh, I have good friends right now. List them.
Yeah.
Don't just say, oh, I have some good influences. There is something dramatic that changes when they are not just like this general group of people, but names listed so that you can look back and maybe this like moment in your life, you're like, okay, I just need to take this out, rip it and put it on my door so that I can have a constant reminder of the people that I'm doing life with. Because in all reality, life is really hard and it's messy and it gets complicated and it leaves you disappointed, questioning who you are and where you want to go. And if every single day you walked out and you said, wait, I am doing this with strong people. I'm doing this with a team, my dream team. And just write, who are they? Who are the people that you're going to be doing life with?
Yeah. This is also one that you could print out little. We've done several of those recently, like from the email or something, or copy it down small and slide it into your margins here and just like fill that.
Who are your people?
Yeah.
Who are you going to go with? And they go and they find these people, the Zoramites, and the Zoramites are where they go and they see something so strange to them. It's something really foreign. And these people are all gathering together. There's like one little spot that they go and one person goes at a time and they say this repeated prayer. And then the next person goes and the next person goes. And what happens is, I think that's like something in and of itself, but I think one of the biggest lessons from that comes in verse 23. And now after the people had all offered up thanks after this manner, they returned to their homes, never speaking of their God again, until they had assembled themselves together again to the holy stand to offer up thanks after their manner. That this, like their beliefs, what they were doing, how they were trying to connect with God, was never personal. And never, like, if you have a personal relationship with something, that's not just going to be something that you just, like, have once a week. Your best friends are the people that you talk to every day.
Yeah.
Your best people are the ones that are constantly updated about your life and what's going on. And you're telling them not just like, hey, how are you? Good, great. How are you doing? Great, awesome. End of conversation. Your best people are the ones that you are having genuine, deep conversation with, and the type of conversation that doesn't just happen once a week. They're your 24-hour friends that you could call at 2 a.m. and say, hey, I'm just really stressed out right now. Like, what can we do to fix this? Can you like work through this with me? And you see a very stark contrast. You see it between the Zoramites and this prayer that they're repeating over and over, and that's it. That's their relationship with God. It's just this once a week repeated prayer. And then at the end of the chapter...
And even some of the things that they say in that prayer are reflective of what their relationship with God is like, which is interesting.
For sure. Which I think would be a really good study, because what's interesting in this chapter is you're going to have the prayer of these people that they repeat. And then later on in the chapter, I think starting with verse 30 in this chapter, you're going to see Alma pray. Is that true that it's Alma? For some reason I just made that up.
It is, yeah. And those verses are in the journal too. So 15 through 18 and 23, or 15 through 23. And then Alma's prayer is 26 through 35.
Easy.
Yeah.
And I think that would be such a cool study, because you're going to see this, and then it almost gets flipped on its head, and you're going to see Alma have one of those prayers. Like, this wants me to change the way that I pray when I read it.
Yeah.
Because he's going to sit down, and there is no question in your mind that Alma has a personal relationship with God. Because he brings things up that you wouldn't talk to with a stranger. He's going to talk about how his heart in verse 31 is exceedingly sorrowful. You don't say that to someone you only see once a week.
Yeah.
You would never tell someone you saw once a week, oh, how are you? Oh, like my heart
it's been so heavy.
is broken right now.
Right.
Like that's like you only say that to someone that you are super close with. And then he's going to go through and he's going to ask for help. You don't tend to ask a stranger for help.
Right.
Unless you're like so desperate, which is like, that's the truth.
Yeah.
But like you don't ask for heart help to a stranger.
Yeah.
And he's going to ask God for that. He's going to go through and he's going to name all of his best friends. You know you are close with someone when you don't just know them, but you know all of their friends too. That they're like bringing people up in this conversation and you're like, oh yeah, you've talked about them before.
Yeah.
They're familiar to me even if they're not in this conversation.
Yeah.
Right? And the more
and P.S., can we just pause about that? We forgot to mention this about the people that are with him on this rescue mission. Are people who had been rescued. I think it's something really cool to see. That it's just like, I had my old buddies, my old friends. I had new ones that I met and I saw changed. And then I've got my kids, It's just like a cool... Yeah. Anyways, just a side thought. Sorry, keep going. It's so pretty what you're teaching.
And that's beautiful. And he's going to go through and he has this prayer to bring these people closer to him. Which... in one sentence, I think is such a beautiful prayer that you see him lay out his relationship with God, how close he feels with God. And then his prayer in the end, in verse 35, is, I can tell that these people might be strangers to you. Mm-hmm. That they might not know you like I do. And so can I introduce them? Just help me bring them a little closer once again to you. Please, that's all I'm asking. That I might get to know you better through this experience, and that maybe, just maybe, I could introduce them to you as well.
And you're really seeing like what he just says become a domino effect, right? Where he's just like the opposite of what Korihor was saying. Where he's like, you're binding people and getting them to only believe your words. And he's just like, no. This is a way of me saying, here are my experiences, and you can have them also. And it was the way that he was teaching, and now that a chance to pass that on, right?
For
to
sure.
To other people.
Well, and it's so cute because at the very end, they all just get so excited in verse 36 and they start clapping their hands and cheering. And it just makes me think that, like, all the way back to the beginning of this chapter, chapter 31, that story could have been very different if he didn't go into it with his friends. If he didn't have people that would clap and cheer and get each other stoked again when they were so disappointed and sad.
Yeah.
And that, you know what? In this game of life that we're playing, this mess of a situation that we sometimes find ourselves in, surround yourself with the people that will get you clapping again.
Yeah, because they're going to be we forgot this guy.
I know, I just saw that too.
Our tender mercy for the week, which I think we'll add on to everything that we just did. Because in addition to the tender mercy is all these things as a testimony. And not just the movements of the earth and the writings of the holy prophets, but God's also given us each other, right? As a testimony. Like, and I think those will be our top of our list kind of things that we will, that have people who have strengthened our faith will be those who we have grown up with and met along the way. So anyways, such good stuff. And this story continues with that group of people next time, and it's just as good. So we'll see you next week.